Perennialism reawakened. I have reintroduced us to ancient wisdom and perennial philosophy. I have done so to bring it into a fully complete singular source of conscious expression. No matter the path that we are currently on from parents to leaders, we all are of this one consciousness. Our experiences when fully understood are exactly as they should be. Our hardships are never fully intended by us, but they are strings of events that if a conscious being viewed would have determined as an outcome. This is also when viewing deaths, wars, incarcerations, and even sexual violence. We have been too pressed to place blame on other beings but never on our own actions, even if those actions were the decision to be born into these conditions. The awakened being will look at these experiences and may grapple with them at first but will come to a pearl of wisdom that will greatly enhance their growth. I say this with the sincerity of my own experiences of these events. Full realization and acceptance will empower us beyond any false interpretations we manifest. The totality of our experiences is strung within a greater scheme of our evolutions. They can be far past events that ripen into these forms or a collection of events that we individually experience to strengthen our whole true selves. Morality and ethics have always left their imprints on our evolving civilizations. Here in America, we are still evolving past our aggressive tendencies to dominate the whole of our environment. But many other societies from our past had developed to such a degree that their civilizations for brief periods in history were able to contemplate more. These ancient philosophers spent years in deep thinking and great debates about our existence. These newfound understandings would commence within the collective consciousness and a being would be born reflective of this wisdom. They would be fully capable of expressing them to the current civilizations, the only conflict would be the receptivity of the masses. These awakened beings will occur simultaneously throughout the physical, mind, and conscious, spirit, evolutions. Consciousness does not deal with future events, it views only what is. Consciousness can observe what was, in determining what is in the now. It can look at possibilities of what may come when determining these factors but knows that these factors are ever changing. Thus, a conscious being will never give a predetermined event for the pure reasoning that these events are truly undetermined. Anyone who has been to a psychic and changed the outcome of the reading will understand this. Conscious mystics, in general, from this viewpoint will speak of self-development, past conscious evolution, and possible future dangers in current conscious evolution. They do not view anything as inevitable and seek to educate and evolve consciousness beyond the constraints of the physical realm. Mind deals in probabilities, it will amass all that was and what is collective. It calculates the outcomes to the highest probability and predicts the inevitable. Mind mystics, in general, will express a definitive prediction of future events. They may be connected to universal mind and its collective understandings and reflect this from what actions determine which outcomes. Their predictions become accurate as we collectively keep them alive through continually reviewing them throughout civilizations. They will gain insights into the factual workings of the universe and impart them to the collective consciousness for further realizations. On many occasions, their future predictions are not 100% accurate, but a generalized percentage enough for us to believe in their factuality. Those predictions that are 100% accurate are due to events not changing and thus the outcome was inevitable. There are some mystics that begin as either conscious or mind, but once gaining such great degrees of input over time they become overlapped in their understandings. They mean well at first, but once they gain an inpouring of support the belief in them can influence them and they can begin to move into convoluted theories that are pressed to properly be received by us. We see them dislodging from their original communication and moving into new forms of communication that may be in opposition to their origins. We are meant to evolve, yet those who have gained original information from them are less likely to accept this evolution and thus impress upon the mystic growth. The amount of information that pours into them is not being fully comprehended in absolute truth and can go haywire to many who attempt to understand their wisdom. This can also be because of the corruption of the outer universe. Lastly, there is the Omni mystic, one that speaks from a place of both consciousness and mind's evolution. These mystics sporadically arise, for all that they bring forth is for the advancement of our mind and consciousness in unity. They generally bring forth new ways of comprehending existence as understood by the collective. They are greater beings that have chosen to express themselves in the physical realm for reasons only they know. They can educate from all realities or a single one depending on their mission here. Their teachings can be quite advanced and factual but understood directly by those it is intended for. They speak to a majority and many that are more advanced in either path may or may not comprehend their work. These writings are often guided and sustained through the efforts of awakened beings. Even when these sacred documents are destroyed, they will be rewritten into the collective by other conscious beings until fully comprehended. These mystics lay the groundwork for our evolution. They researched and reasoned the world in which we survive. They have branched off into different identifications/titles that now reflect the way we are taught in our civilization. Even when we consider that we have brought forth some new form of understanding, we must know that it was only made possible by what was realized by conscious efforts that may be deeply rooted in past realizations. These philosophical points of view, like us, are ever evolving. I bring forth this understanding so that we can fully realize the ways in which societies develop their educational processes. This can also be viewed as to how we are taught from our philosophical viewpoints when obtaining what mystics imparted to us. The individual roots of philosophy will determine the way in which we are educated morally and ethically in our societies. There are many forms of philosophies that have arisen throughout our time here on Earth. I will discuss those that have sustained throughout evolution. Some bear a semblance of truth and reflect a direction toward conscious growth and understanding. These philosophies hold sway over our societal upbringings and how we grow into productive members of our different nations and as one. Perennialism values knowledge that transcends time. This is a subject-centered philosophy. Perennials believe that education should exemplify a prepared effort to make these ideas available to students and to guide their thought processes toward the understanding and appreciation of the great works. Works of literature written by history's finest thinkers transcend time and never become outdated. Perennials are primarily concerned with the importance of mastery of the content and the development of reasoning skills. They are contented with a strict curriculum that seeks to replicate the same understanding in the student as the teacher in continuity, but are accepting if the student exceeds while maintaining the root disciplines. In this philosophy, skills are developed in a sequential manner. Here, the teachers are the main actors on the stage. Perennialism was originally religious in nature, developed first by Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century in his work De Magistro, on the teacher. Thomas Aquinas is considered one of the Catholic Church's greatest theologians and philosophers. He was strictly against the notion of natural theology, a type of theology that provides arguments for the existence of God based on reason and the ordinary experience of nature. He never considered himself a philosopher and criticized philosophers, whom he saw as pagans, for he criticized them for falling short of the true and proper wisdom to be found in Christian revelation. With this in mind, Thomas did have respect for Aristotle. Much of his work bears upon philosophical topics, and in this sense may be characterized as philosophical. Thomas's philosophical thought has exerted enormous influence on subsequent Christian theology, especially that of the Catholic Church, extending to Western philosophy in general. Essentialism is also a subject-centered philosophy. Essentialism is the educational philosophy of teaching basic skills. This philosophy advocates training the mind. Essentialist educators focus on transmitting a series of progressively difficult topics and promoting students to the next level. Subjects are focused on the historical context of the material world and culture and move sequentially to give a solid understanding of the present day. The teachers impart knowledge mainly through conducting lectures, during which students are expected to take notes. When their assessments show sufficient competence, they are promoted to the next level to learn more difficult material. Essentialism is the view that every entity has a set of attributes that are necessary to its identity and function. In early Western thought, Plato's idealism held that all things have such essence and form. Essentialism has been controversial from its beginning. Essentialism can be particularly malevolent when applied to human beings and their identities. In medical sciences, this can lead to a misguided view of individualities. An example was that it assumed differences in hypertension in Afro-American populations were due to racial differences rather than social causes. This led to misleading assumptions and potentially unequal treatment. Essentialists manufactured viewpoints that led to core concepts of many hateful and xenophobic thoughts. Especially older social theories were guilty of essentialism. Here in America it was made rigid through Darwinism. Romanticism is a belief in the natural goodness of humans which is hindered by the urban life of civilization. Romanticism was a philosophical movement during the Age of Enlightenment, roughly 18th century, which emphasizes emotional self-awareness as a necessary precondition to improving society and bettering the human condition. Romantics believe that knowledge is gained through intuition rather than deduction. This is a student-centered philosophy that focuses on differentiation. This attempts to meet the students' learning readiness needs as they advance. At a school founded on the philosophy of Romanticism, there are no set curricula, no formal classes, or tests. Students decide what they want to learn, and in some cases, the students are expected to take full responsibility for their learning. The 5 essential characteristics of Romanticism are imagination, intuition, individuality, idealism, and inspiration. This philosophy is rooted in the German Sturm und Drang movement, which preferred intuition and emotion to the rationalism of Enlightenment, events, and ideologies. The French Revolution was also an adjacent factor in its growth. The philosopher Johann Georg Hamann is considered to be the visionary of the Sturm und Drang. It progressed initially through other names as Johann Anton Leiswitz, Jacob Michael Reinhold Lenz, H. L. Wagner, and Friedrich Maximilian Klinger. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe and Friedrich Schiller. I leave these names for your own study should you wish to. Progressivism is a belief that individuality, progress, and change are fundamental to one's education. Believing that people learn best from what they consider most relevant to their lives, progressivists center their curricula on the needs, experiences, interests, and abilities of students. Progressivists believe that education should focus on the whole student, rather than on the content or the teacher. They emphasize group activity and group problem solving so that the students learn through cooperative learning strategies. It is anti-authoritarian, experimental, and visionary and aims to develop problem-solving abilities in the student. Immanuel Kant identified progress as being a movement away from barbarism toward civilization. 18th-century philosopher and political scientist Marquis de Condorcet predicted that political progress would involve the disappearance of slavery, the rise of literacy, the lessening of sex inequality, prison reforms which at the time were harsh, and the decline of poverty. Modernity or modernization was a key form of the idea of progress as promoted by classical liberals in the 19th and 20th centuries who called for the rapid modernization of the economy and society to remove the traditional hindrances to free markets and free movements of people. I must relate some historical facts on progressivism. I feel we have lost these concepts in our current culture and now just view it as a title of the Democratic Party. In the United States, progressivism began as an intellectual rebellion against the political philosophy of constitutionalism. President Theodore Roosevelt of the Republican Party and later the Progressive Party declared that he always believed that wise progressivism and wise conservatism go hand in hand. President Woodrow Wilson was also a member of the American Progressive Movement within the Democratic Party. Progressive stances have evolved over time. In the 21st century, progressives continue to favor a public policy that reduces or betters the harmful effects of economic inequality as well as systemic discrimination such as institutional racism, to advocate for environmentally conscious policies as well as for social safety nets and workers' rights, and to oppose the negative externalities inflicted on the environment and society by monopolies or corporate influence on the democratic process. The influences of these four philosophies reverberate throughout our world. There are many mystics/philosophers that grab the torch and carry them forward into another time period, adding, replacing, and even deleting its original philosophy. Mystics are born into all forms of civilizations, and many times don't fully progress due to the hindrances laid upon the societies in which they awaken. We must become conscious of what is presented to move forward. There is in fact wisdom in all four of these paths. We must take from them what must be learned and structure a true holistic form of educating our civilization. These philosophies are derived from conscious/mind mystics. We often misperceive perennialism. This is due to it branching off into two directions. The one I presented, in the beginning, was stagnated due to the constraints of belief structures during that particular period. The obvious reason is the tight hold that these beliefs had on any new information being realized. However, this other path manifested in new thoughts that we have come to know as Universalism, Transcendentalism, and Unitarianism, which I will explain now. Universalism is the philosophical and theological concept that some ideas have universal application or applicability for growth. The living truth is seen as more far-reaching than the national, cultural, or religious boundaries or interpretations of that one truth. It emphasizes that religion is a universal human quality, and also focuses on the universal principles of most religions. It accepts all religions in an inclusive manner. This approach to religion is called religious pluralism. The title universalist can be applied to any other belief structure as an enhancement, but is generally placed at the end of a particular belief, unless the belief accepts universalism foremost. Universalists have been Anglican, Presbyterian, Roman Catholics, and even Quakers. They branch off and hold these titles as well as Kabbalists, philosophers, mystics, and clerics. Transcendentalism is a core belief in the inherent goodness of people and nature, and while society and its institutions have corrupted the purity of the individual, people are at their best when they are truly self-reliant and independent. Transcendentalism emphasizes subjective intuition over objective observation. Adherents believe that individuals are capable of generating completely original insights with little attention and deference to past masters. It arose as a reaction to protest against the general state of intellectualism and spirituality at the time. Transcendentalists desire to ground their religion and philosophy in principles based upon the German Romanticism of Johann Gottfried Herder and Friedrich Schleiermacher. This philosophy also has its roots in the transcendental philosophy of Immanuel Kant and German idealism spoken of in progressivism. As the concepts were able to sustain and touch the evolving civilizations, Romanticism and Progressivism harmonized. The Transcendentalists believed that society and its institutions, particularly organized religion and political parties, corrupt the purity of the individual. It is only from such real individuals that a true community can form. Even with this necessary individuality, Transcendentalists also believe that all people are outlets for the Oversoul. Because the Oversoul is one, this unites all people as one being. Unitarianism is a Christian theological movement named for its belief that the God in Christianity is one entity as opposed to the Trinity. Most other branches of Christianity define God as one being in three persons, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Unitarian Christians, therefore, believe that Jesus was inspired by God in his moral teachings, and he is a Savior, but he was not a deity or God incarnate. Unitarianism will not establish one single Christian denomination, but rather refers to a collection of both existing and extinct Christian groups, whether historically related to each other or not, which share a common theological concept of the oneness and nature of God. Unitarian communities have developed in Britain, South Africa, India, Canada, the United States, Jamaica, Nigeria, and Japan. Later, I will clarify this concept through the Nicene Creed and the Arian controversy. For it had a great impact on conscious progressive efforts at the time. There is not a direct time correlation between these philosophies that I have presented. Consciousness does not conduct itself within a time frame, it arises when the seeds of consciousness ripen. They can be originated throughout the entire evolutionary track and then ripen when we evolve to understand them. Thus, the mystics are born to attempt to relate this to civilizations. Mystics will at times lose sight of their original realizations. This eventually will either be outgrown by us or continue to influence us over eras. This brings us to the evolution of the perennial philosophy, also referred to as perennialism and perennial wisdom. This is a perspective in philosophy and spirituality that views all of the world's religious traditions as sharing a single, metaphysical truth or origin from which all esoteric and exoteric knowledge and doctrine have grown. Perennialism has its roots in the Renaissance interest in Neoplatonism and its idea of the one, from which all existence emanates. The idea of a perennial philosophy originated with a number of Renaissance theologians who took inspiration from Neoplatonism and from the theory of forms. Marsilio Ficino, 1433–1499, argued that there is an underlying unity to the world, the soul or love, which has a counterpart in the realm of ideas. According to the traditionalist school, the perennial philosophy is absolute truth and infinite presence. Absolute truth is the perennial wisdom that stands as the transcendent source of all the intrinsically orthodox religions of humankind. Infinite presence is the perennial religion that lives within the heart of all intrinsically orthodox religions. The traditionalist school discerns a transcendent and an immanent dimension, namely the discernment of the real or absolute, which is permanent, and the intentional mystical concentration on the real. Our beginning concepts of perennialism now evolve to fit our current conscious collective. If you are able to note that our philosophical views eventually grew into a more spiritual reflection over time. Helena Blavatsky, an Omni mystic born into an aristocratic Russian-German family in the Russian Empire, now Ukraine, traveled widely around the empire as a child. Largely self-educated, she developed an interest in Western esotericism during her teenage years. In 1849 she embarked on a series of world travels, visiting Europe, the Americas, and India. During this period, she encountered a group of spiritual adepts, the masters of the ancient wisdom, who sent her to Tibet, where they trained her to develop a deeper understanding of the synthesis of religion, philosophy, and science. She is famously known for her work The Sacred Doctrine, where she brought forth a rich understanding of our spiritual evolution. One that awakened theosophical views to the world, which she commented as being the synthesis of science, religion, and philosophy. She proclaimed that she was reviving an ancient wisdom which underlay all the world's religions. Her theosophical doctrines influenced the spread of Hindu and Buddhist ideas in the West as well as the development of Western esoteric currents like Ariosophy, Anthroposophy, and the New Age movement. Blavatsky alleged that she departed Tibet with the mission of proving to the world that the phenomena identified by spiritualists were objectively real, thus defending spiritualism against accusations of fraud made by scientific materialists. However, she also stated that the entities being contacted by spiritualist mediums were not the spirits of the dead, as the spiritualist movement typically alleged, but instead either mischievous elementals, which I spoke of as entities from the dark plane, or the shells left behind by the deceased, which I spoke of as infected souls in the realms of internalizations and fears. She sought to awaken us to the outer universe and its corruption of our consciousness. She would live an extensive life of wonder and scrutiny from those alike. The theosophical society that she established would manifest an intricate philosophical structure to cosmology, the macrocosm of the universe, spiritual hierarchies, and intermediary beings. The latter has correspondences with a hierarchical conception of the microcosm of man. The society based itself upon the following three objectives. 1. To form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color. 2. To encourage the study of comparative religion, philosophy, and science. 3. To investigate the unexplained laws of nature and the powers latent in man. Many conscious understandings can be understood through her work and existence here. Though not the first Omni mystic, she is the one that has brought us full circle by connecting Eastern and Western thought. She took us even further by modernizing ancient wisdom into full comprehension of our spiritual evolution. Many dark beings sought to quiet her, but she persisted and was able to make her knowledge known. Though many may have a variety of opinions, I choose to keep this wisdom evolving. Evolution of ancient wisdom. The stars in the universe were always a spectacle of conscious examinations to us as Earth's evolution. We as conscious observers always influence the intrigue in them through our counterparts within the physical world. Eventually, this influenced the developing great societies into building knowledge of the known universe. This was known to us for millenniums throughout the root races of Lemurian and Atlantean. We did not conceive anything other than the absolute and consciousness as a whole within the universe. Our material forms, water's evolution, came to understand that they were made exceptional through their growing interest, but never realized it was because we awakened from our slumber on these common comforts. As our material forms went about their existence in their structuring and organizing, we observed with slight interest. We resided as observers, not partaking in the events of water's evolution. On occasion, some of us would awaken through interest and influence the bodies in which we cohabitated in. This would send a stir within the civilizations, as we would be seen as pace-setters, visionaries, or even rebellious. This awakening to form is still done today as we intermittently lose sight of our conscious lineage throughout lifetimes of rebirth. Some of us have such hardships in a lifetime that we decide to give up and just go with the flow of societies. Others begin to stir in a continued blinking on/off throughout lifetimes as they begin to amass truth that resonates within their core consciousness. Then there are those of us that amassed enough truth that we can piece together what consciousness is seeking to manifest to move forward. We as conscious beings decided to collectively awaken in the last stages of the Atlantean Age, an already well-formed civilization. This would be our second awakening. We fell into slumber at the end of the Lemurian Age and took a back seat as modest observers to the passage of evolution. Those deemed worthy, only fully awakening to move us forward into the next root races when in conjunction with the planetary logos callings. At the time, we knew that the physical realm held dangers to us and wasn't mature enough to step out as a whole. Corruption is primarily derived from our physical forms. Every form of ancient wisdom has sought to convey this within their particular means of communication, though some far more obscure than others. Like the shell of a seed that protects its core, our bodies, physical, etheric, and astral, protect our true natures until that seed is ripened to bloom. We can justifiably say that we have been in an incubated period for millions of years, learning, experiencing, and preparing for this next stage. Much like the seeds in nature, the environment in which it blooms will determine its ability to prosper and survive. Thus, the collective consciousness seeks to create the prosperous conditions for when we fully awaken. We do so in a universe that is known for truth. Our very forms exist within these three bodies and reflect these truths. Have we ever considered contemplating how we observe the universe? On our planet, we look about and see the structuring of time and space in the slowest of manifestation. Our forms are made to conform to this structure as we are plugged into the many events that must happen throughout the day and schedules. Our minds are a constant concoction of past, current, and future events that we view as happening all at once. We never consciously separate these three experiences, for we identify them as a collective understanding of our individual life. One that we are continuously made aware of is time-based. Our true God natures are shown when we look out into the universe beyond the time stream of this planet. Within seconds and minutes, bursts of light happen in our universe. Billions of stars continuously are dying and being born. We alone lay witness to this. The life of a billion-year star is seen to us in a blink of an eye successively. We are able to see existence as the source of consciousness sees it, a singular whole. We're boundlessly aware of millions and billions of years through a conscious reflection of the known universe. This is not just an understanding, it is a direction of true realization. This is why the ancients had civilizations built on cosmological and astronomical mappings. Where we in today's world see life as only important here on Earth, they saw a universal civilization that was intimately connected to our existence. They saw universal bodies in their true forms, as grand beings interacting and influencing one another. As they observed, they realized that we alone see these grand beings, they have very little awareness of us. How rare a thing this is. That a speck within the universe would be conscious of its whole. It would be likened to a microorganism within our bodies being able to consciously view the entire body and its workings. They came to understand that other beings like us, yet in other astronomical clusters, had a shared evolution. They were able to derive distinct personalities of these grand beings and how astrologically they influenced our life cycles here on Earth. And would lay witness to their wars and alliances as they sought to dominate their places in the heavens. Once our perspectives began to shift from conscious observations to identifying, documenting and recording began to take shape. This convoluted us as observers that experienced the evolving universe and took us to a place where we defined it. Making its documents primarily learned and studied for future beings. On occasions, some of these ancient students would find new understandings of the universe. But this would be rare as they all were taught from the same documents and had developed a particular understanding. They societally praised the experts in these fields and concretely conformed to their wisdom on the topics. This is where the breakdown truly begins. Many believe that the Atlantean age did not possess literature, but they did. The fastest way to become infected with misconceptions is to become strict and rigid in our belief systems. Whenever we stagnate conscious progression in a society, it will inevitably become corrupted and fail. The same will occur within belief systems, with strict adherence and directed activity which leaves little room for conscious growth. Thus, with the gradual decline of their higher forms of telepathic communication, they, towards the descending of their evolution, shared knowledge through a documented form of thought. This eventually manifested in leaders within the Atlantean age that were born of corruption. When minimizing truth, this will inevitably be the outcome. They took the Atlanteans to an era that would inevitably lead to their destruction. Few among the masses in these civilizations were privy to the collected wisdom and were just born to maintain the organized progression. We find it hard to believe in such an event but forget how close we came to such destruction in the last century with the threat of atomic war. Could we truly fathom a catastrophe that would have laid waste to the entire planet? Why is it so hard for us to conceive that an entire continent was demolished? We have been given the false narratives that we alone possess such destructive technology, not realizing that there are understandings far worse. Their technology was connected to many bases they had around the world that would suffer simultaneously, only now remnants deep in the oceans that we are now not allowed to explore. Like many who live and prosper in the shadow of a volcano never willing to leave until it's too late, the Atlanteans were similar. They never ever believed that it could happen to them. Those that did, left in hurried paces within a matter of only a few days. Never taking the time needed to properly establish themselves in a new location. Therefore, needing to re-establish themselves and form new alliances before rebuilding a semblance of what was lost. Their technologies were of crystals and sound, a knowledge derived from millions of years. It would not be recreated in a matter of thousands, much less be knowable by those who fled safely. Their documents and recordings have begun anew, in new lands and in new environments. Yet now if you simply research the latest discoveries of the power of sound and how it can affect water, you will gain insights into this technology. Lastly, we must realize that they eventually reincarnated as well. The more conscious among them would seek to keep alive their past understandings but were bombarded by so many different realities throughout their lifetimes. Those aligned with consciousness manifested in conscious collective areas and sought to bring forth their wisdom throughout their lineage. While those of the outer universe were also brought forth to areas that strengthened its destructive tendencies. We must admit that we were too late in this collective awakening. It has become apparent that only through great loss that we choose to awaken. All the technologies of the Atlanteans are still within our conscious collective beginning to manifest again. Creating now a planet, not just an island of self-sufficiency. This is even more fully comprehended with solar, wind, and more advanced water energies. Burning fuel and nuclear waste have proven to be incredibly detrimental to the world. But we must see this consciously or existence has a way of repeating itself. The Deluge. Much ancient literature speaks of the Deluge. This is far before even the biblical writings and cannot be disputed. These are among the stories that continuously rewrite themselves into mystics' understandings that are reincarnated into each era. I submit it is because the collective consciousness seeks to keep this story alive, not due to its actuality in time. Many floods do in fact have concrete historical documentation, but this was one of worldly proportions. This deluge did not hinder our conscious evolution. Those greater beings among us were generally granted the first rebirths after the event and continued their progress. I bring this to our awareness because the ending of the Atlantean root race, fourth root race, was succeeded by the beginning of the Aryan root race, fifth root race, in India. Those that left and sought to rebuild physically from the Atlantean age carried consciousness from the prior root race. Those in India were reincarnated with the new consciousness of the fifth root race, granted by the great sacrifice of that perfected being. India would eventually influence the rest of the world as this new root race would reincarnate throughout the world. Vedic scriptures from multiple sources speak of the Deluge as a time when Vishnu spoke to one called Manu Vaivasvata, Manu, being a title of a holy man. In this story after the flood, the restart of human civilization was maintained to become prosperous before they were permitted to leave their safe haven and venture forth into the outer world. But I still must speak of these other deluge stories from our ancient history. 1. Greek, Zeus set a flood to destroy the men of the Bronze Age. Prometheus advised his son Deucalion to build a chest. All other men perished except for a few who escaped to the high mountains. The mountains in Thessaly were parted, and all the world beyond the Isthmus and Peloponnese was overwhelmed. 2. Sumerian, the gods had decided to destroy mankind. The god Enlil warned the priest King Ziusudra of the coming flood by speaking to a wall while Ziusudra listened at the side. He was instructed to build a great ship and carry beasts and birds upon it. 3. Pygmy, chameleon heard a strange noise, like water running, in a tree, but at that time there was no water in the world. He cut open the trunk, and water came out in a great flood that spread all over the earth. The first human couple emerged with the water. 4. Vogel, after 7 years of drought, the great woman said to the great man that rains had come elsewhere, how should they save themselves? The great man counseled the other giants to make boats from cut poplars, anchor them with ropes of willow roots 500 fathoms long and provide them with 7 days of food and with pots of melted butter to grease the ropes. Those who did not make all the preparations perished when the waters came. After 7 days, the waters sank. But all plants and animals had perished, even the fish. 5. Victoria, Bunjil, the creator, was angry with people because of the evil they did, so he caused the ocean to flood by urinating into it. All people were destroyed except those whom Bunjil loved and fixed as stars in the sky, and a man and a woman who climbed a tall tree on a mountain, and from whom the present human race is descended. 6. Papua New Guinea, a flood covered the whole world except for the summit of Mount Tauga. When the waves threatened to cover even that, the rock face cracked and the diamond-studded head of Rod Al Lo, king of snakes, emerged. His fiery tongue licked out to taste the waves, and the water, hissing, retreated. Rod Al Lo slowly uncoiled and pursued the water all the way back to the ocean bed. 7. Norton Sound Eskimo, in the first days, the water from the sea came up and flooded all the earth except for a very high mountain in the middle. A few animals escaped to this mountain, and a few people survived in a boat, subsisting on fish. The people landed on the mountain as the water subsided and followed the retreating water to the coast. The animals also descended. 8. Tarascan, northern Michoacán, Mexico, when the great flood came, God built a house. Everyone tried to crowd into it, those who failed were drowned. The house floated on the waters for 20 days, striking the sky 3 times. Each story that consistently resurfaces is akin to an underlining current beaconing us towards a fragment of conscious truth. When we come to such realizations, we will finally concrete this truth within the collective consciousness. Only then, we will as a collective conscious move forward in understanding more. For us, the deluge is saying that impermanence to form is what must be known to consciousness. So many voices have spoken to us, it is time we listen to this ancient truth. The ancient masters of the yugas even state that at the end of each epoch a great flood occurs. No matter what heights we may build to, form will forever and again be lost to us. So that we come to know what it is, that lies beyond form. There are so many more, like the well-known Gilgamesh flood in Mesopotamia. The Great Flood is one of the many stories that have maintained itself throughout our evolution. Similar stories that repeat themselves also include the story of Jesus Christ, though this is the current story, it has many similarities to the stories of Krishna, Odysseus, Romulus, Dionysus, and Attis of Phrygia. I urge you to take the time to explore these just for your interests. Among these figures there will be direct similarities to Jesus of Nazareth. They consistently have versions of the following. 1. Born on December 25th. 2. Born to a virgin. 3. Star in the east. 4. Adored by 3 kings. 5. Teacher at 12 years old. 6. Baptized/ministry at 30 years. 7. 12 disciples. I do not seek to disprove the past stories or the current stories. I wish to raise our consciousness to understand why these stories continue to resurface. The entirety of this epic story of consciousness has yet to release itself to us. It will manifest eventually. We can thus far piece together what has manifested. Much like the Deluge and the story of Christ, our connection to the universe continues to reinsert itself into our collective conscious understandings. Know only that these things that persist, will do so until we fully awaken to them. It is a blessing that these stories are part of our worldly understandings and no longer fractioned off from whence they originated. Like consciousness, they refuse to be contained. This can include stories such as the miraculous birth of Jesus Christ, which is detailed more than a few times. Some include Gaia giving birth to Erycthonius, a legendary early ruler of ancient Athens. Danae gave birth to Perseus, the legendary founder of Mycenae and of the Perseid dynasty. Also, Perictione, mother of Plato, an Athenian philosopher during the classical period in ancient Greece. The miraculous birth is saying to us that our true birth is not given to us by forms. To gain the consciousness to look beyond our families, societies, and civilizations so that we can realize our true manifestation in one source. There are consistent savior deities. An original one would actually be of a goddess known by the early Mesopotamia as Inanna. Next, Osiris of Egypt, Yahashua in the earliest Hebrew sects, later named Yeshua, and later after many more like this, Jesus of Nazareth. There is the continued reinventing of the Cain and Abel story. In Egypt, we have Set and Osiris, in Sumerian we have Dumuzid and Enkidu, and in Rome, we have Romulus and Remus. These stories assuredly point us away from doing harm to our brothers and sisters. It can also be looked at in a broader concept on a global scale. Knowing that some stories have absolute truth connected to them, we must look consciously at what these stories are saying to us from the source of consciousness. When we are able to find such realizations, we are then able to see which stories were from an altered truth. Absolute reality will be laid before us, and we will henceforth dismiss any relative realities in which we no longer have a purpose. Yet we must raise our consciousness to accept also that all events may have occurred throughout our conscious history. The lost documentation of Jesus of Nazareth's life, where we seek to piece together civilizations that he may have traveled to. This can be fully realized as a single greater being, fragmented into many forms to gain fully awakened understandings. Such consciousness cannot be viewed in historical conceptions, for they manifested with a mixture of simultaneous and asynchronous timelines, which can conceivably be the same for many of our evolutionary figures. I will bring forth this understanding later. Moses presented us with the 10 Commandments, and he was known as the lawgiver. His birth is very similar to Sargon of Assyria as it relates to their upbringing and the dramatic story of being placed in the basket as a baby. Yet among the lawgivers, there are others I will relate to. 1. Manu in India. 2. Minos in Crete. 3. Meses in Egypt. The similarities to the names are very obvious, however, since they all at one time presented laws to their followings, it becomes even more of interest whom this greater being was in our past history. Remember what I originally had said in prior chapters on writings done by greater beings. The pure beauty of some of these most ancient writings is that they are instilled with the intent to manifest realizations to conscious beings ripened to receive their truths. They survive because of the greater beings that realize their true worth. The last of these conceptions I wish to bring forth is that of how consciousness and mind view time. In considering the 7 days of which God created the earth in Genesis and many alike stories, we must contemplate where the mystics' viewpoints were. As we look out into the universe, we realize that the closer we get to this planet, the slower time is perceived. If such a conscious being was viewing Earth from afar, such a creation would be incredibly faster than we could fathom. Not to say that creation stories all bear truth, but those mystics that tap the conscious collective can comprehensively view creation here on this planet with such expediency as within a 7-day event. The Deluge occurred over 198,700 years ago. Took over 5.6 years and 520 years to recuperate. This is seen as just a blink in the eye to conscious evolution. If talking with a greater being on this event, it would sound like it happened yesterday. Should they manifest themselves there while contemplating this, they would view it in much slower timeframes. Lastly, if they lack the consciousness to pinpoint this time, they can arrive in many different stories of floods and possibly misrepresent the time points. These events are solely dependent on their growth within the conscious collective. We are technically still in an ice age. During this time ice recedes in what is called a glacial minimum, which we have understood to be called a little ice age around just 1,500 years ago. The reverse of this is called a glacial maximum, which poses the possibility of global ice encompassment. This would be easy to see how water and floods have been a constant to us over our current civilizations. Now I've laid the groundwork to begin. Thank you for joining me in this episode that will be the bridgeway for my next series. Perennial understandings and ancient wisdoms must be brought forward with new consciousness so that we can evolve past our current conditions. For within all knowledge lies the seeds of absolute truth. Communication can only be imparted in the means to which each individual is capable. But this does not mean that there is not wisdom within each source. We must raise our consciousness to realize the universal voice within all. As always, peaceful journeys. If you enjoyed my podcast, please consider helping my progress in any way. Please feel free to contact me, or subscribe, find me on my social networks, share, like, and of course any monetary assistance will be placed back into my work. I am a new author of just under a year and have really made my work completely within reach at just 99 cents on Amazon Kindle. The information is more important than anything, but everything helps in a collective way. Thank you again.